The Sonic the Hedgehog series began in 1991 with a colorful blue hedgehog saving trapped animals from their colorful robot prisons and saving his little island from evil Theodore Roosevelt Santa Claus. 10 years later, the release of Sonic Adventure 2 would be jarring to someone who only knew Sonic from his first adventure. With its introduction of Sonic's angsty twin with a tragic backstory, who would come to be a secondary protagonist for the series, spawning his very own game in 2005 and spearheading an even more foreign image of the Sonic series. The angry video game nerd's reaction to Shadow's 2005 game speaks volumes of just how hard a turn Shadow's introduction represented.
I don't even know who Shadow is, and when did characters in Sonic games start carrying guns? I feel like I just awoke from a frozen sleep. Last I knew, Sonic games were in 2D, Nintendo and Sega were rivals, guns were for Contra, Sonic's nemesis was called Dr. Robotnik, now he's going by Dr. Eggman Diddy Daddy, villain formerly known as whatever. What the hell happened here?
As we close off this year of Shadow, that's been nothing short of a fantastic year for the Sonic series as a whole, it might not be as obvious as it once was that Shadow's creation and prevalence in the series was a point of intense critique.
Someone needs to explain Sonic series, so send me the story jumping forward. Just let's play it over and some levels and
Shadow's role in Sonic Adventure 2 was that of a tragic hero. A one-off that would go out in a blaze of glory, saving the world he spent the whole game trying to destroy. However, the initial feedback on Shadow was so overwhelmingly positive at the time, this decision was backpedaled, and he was rewritten into the series as a mainstay character. Shadow was a very unique face in the series from the moment he was introduced because he possessed something that no other character had. But how much could this trauma be milked before it became a tired chore to go over again and again? Faced with this dilemma, the Sonic writers came up with a new opportunity for Shadow's character to develop. After Shadow's mysterious return in Sonic Heroes, he was unable to recall his traumatic past due to this really rare condition called amnesia. In case you're unfamiliar with the concepts of amnesia, it's basically in a video game when you wake up and you can't remember who you are. I will say though, in terms of cases of amnesia portrayed in video games, I'd say Shadow is one of the more interesting ones. In Sonic Heroes, Shadow ends up reuniting with everybody that he met in his recent past, like Dr. Robotnik, Rouge the Bat, and Sonic. But still, they don't really actually understand Shadow's past. He can only get vague answers. You know who does know better than anyone in the story about Shadow's past? The Sonic Adventure 2 player. They see the vision of Maria in Shadow 05, and it's like, oh, I've seen that. I know about that. In most game narratives that follow this trope, amnesia is a device to bridge the gap between the player and the protagonist. The player learns about the protagonist's past at the same time the character they are playing does. When Shadow returns, all he can remember is his name and the vision of Maria being shot.
Maria!
But Black Doom then comes to Shadow. He's not awfully surprised to see Shadow. And he's the first person to seem to actually know who he really was. When Shadow sees Black Doom, it's like, wait a minute, this guy knows me. Shadow has no blood, no family. There's no one that shares Shadow's upbringing. The only person was Maria. Soon after in Shadow 05, we're introduced to a man who turns out to have known Shadow from 50 years ago. The commander of Gun himself, Abraham Tower. The only of his Ark family left alive, and yet he hates Shadow. He despises him and vows to kill him. With the addition of these characters, the player is thrown a curveball. We might have thought we understood Shadow's past, But it then turns out that some of it was kept from us, and much of it was likely to have been kept from him, too. I find it unlikely that the Shadow we knew in Sonic Adventure 2 had any awareness of Black Doom at all, or any knowledge that Abe survived the raid on the Ark. There are pieces of this Amnesia puzzle that only the player has. There are pieces dangled in front of Shadow by Black Doom. There's knowledge Gerald Robotnik had that he never chose to share with Shadow. Commander Tower, as someone who knew and loved Maria the same way Shadow did, has a surprising and initially confusing hatred for him. But by the end of the game, we can understand why Abraham Tower hates Shadow. Because he knows Black Doom. To Abraham, Shadow is Black Doom. The aliens of the Black Comet have come and invaded the Earth, and Abe knew Shadow would be there with the Black Arms. While these characters know Shadow's origins, and perhaps the purpose behind his creation, his more recent connections understand his ongoing struggle, and know better who he became when he chose to protect the world. Shadow's relationship with Sonic is one of the rival dynamics of all time. I think that when Shadow and Sonic first look at each other, it's kind of like, whoa, twins. I mean, what is Shadow supposed to think? In the events of Sonic Adventure 2, Sonic manages to pull off Chaos Control with the fake emerald that Tails created. Sonic got Chaos Control with the power of friendship. I think this just really amazes Shadow. The person that Shadow gains the most respect for by the end of his journey is Sonic, and Sonic the same towards Shadow. Shadow even goes so far as to tell Sonic he might be the ultimate life form. And then the way they interact in Heroes is so weird, they literally just flirt the whole time. Either way, Sonic can't be much help to Shadow in terms of understanding his past. Perhaps he can only lead by example. Of all the characters that Shadow met in the events of Sonic Adventure 2, Rouge was probably the most earnest relationship he developed. They collaborate through most of the game in retrieving the Chaos Emeralds for completely different motives. In fact, Rouge seems to have two motives at once. She's a double agent, literally stealing Chaos Emeralds from the military she's a spy for. All the while, she's tasked with studying Shadow and determining if he's the ultimate life form described in the Project Shadow files. She turns out to actually know a bit about Shadow and Project Shadow, the name of the research project tasked with the creation of the ultimate life form. Being informed of this, Rouge confronts Shadow and says, "Just who are you, really?" Shadow, in turn, shares his purpose in his hard fight to get the emeralds loaded up in the Eclipse cannon. After his second fall to Earth in SA2, Rouge is the one who frees Shadow from the chamber in Eggman's base. She thought she was going to be finding treasure there, but Shadow's interesting. If there's anyone Shadow could count on to reveal his past to him, Rouge would probably be the most willing to tell him everything she knows. But what really does she know? And what does any of it have to do with who he really is? Interestingly, I don't think this is a question Shadow had the answer to even before he lost his memory. He still had so much to understand about the world. He hadn't even seen the Earth. It almost feels like Shadow's amnesia gives him some inner peace after the loss of Maria to actually ponder these things. Eggman was another character that collaborated heavily with Shadow. Shadow actually refers to him as his master in Sonic Adventure 2, but their collaboration is, I think, more shallow than Eggman realizes. Shadow cares way more about gathering the Chaos Emeralds for the Eclipse cannon than actually helping Eggman accomplish any of his dumb goals. And Eggman sees Shadow as an object, a weapon, as his grandfather's greatest creation. Of course, he built Sonic just like me. I'm a genius. My grandfather's a genius. It's kind of crazy when you think about for the lore of Sonic, that Sonic is such a powerful force that Eggman had to build his own Sonic, and then he goes and awakens the creation of his grandfather from the past that's just, like, also Sonic? Like, they just all make Sonics. And he's, like, the greatest Sonic of all time, the ultimate life form. You know, when I think about it, Eggman could have been, like, a family for Shadow, but Eggman just totally dehumanizes him. He's just like, oh, this is awesome. My grandfather's creation is going to give me my Eggman empire. Insane. Shadow awakens in Eggman's facility, so obviously, remembering nothing, he does have questions for the person that had him locked away and seems to share a name with his creator, Professor Gerald. Eggman does not care to divulge any information to Shadow. In fact, Shadow's curiosity is a nuisance to him. He knows who Shadow's creator is. I think on some level, he feels entitled to Shadow. So he doesn't really offer him any genuine help in understanding his past. He locked him away and made mindless clones. And you know what? This whole amnesia thing, it's a little weird, isn't it? Did Eggman wipe Shadow's memory in an attempt to make him obey him? Have we ever thought about that? I mean, he's cloning Shadow. I think he had Shadow in the workshop, you know? But maybe his memories just melted away in the meteoric fall to Earth. He did have 0 rings after all. The fire was definitely a hit, unfortunately. But then, finally, a whole 2 games go by, and 9 minutes into the fight with Devil Doom, Eggman reveals to Shadow that he's alive because he saved his life. Or one of his robots did. Eggman makes a lot of robots. He's obviously a genius roboticist with a 300 IQ. Such a genius that he created many of his own life forms. The E-Series robots were introduced in Sonic Adventure and are interesting creations by Dr. Eggman. In Sonic Adventure, you play as E102 Gamma. His behavior is funny in that he seems to develop a moral dilemma on his existence. He learns that he and his E-Series brethren run on live flickies, so he vows to destroy all of his brothers and finally himself to free the animals that live inside them. Eggman continued to make E-Series robots and eventually landed on E123 Omega, the last of them. When Rouge awakens Shadow, she also activates Omega, who may have been put there as a guard for Shadow. Either way, this duty didn't seem to satisfy Omega very much. I'd be willing to bet Eggman had Omega fighting Shadow androids before. The fight the two of them break out into isn't one Omega is unprepared for. Rouge is able to break up the fight and get a Team Dark together to go after Eggman. So, Shadow at least has a Dr. Eggman informant in Omega. At the end of the Team Dark story in Sonic Heroes, Rouge and Omega stumble into a room full of Shadow androids in chambers. Omega reassures Rouge that for these clones to exist, the original must exist somewhere. It's clear to Omega from the very beginning just who the original is. Shadow has friends, but friends aren't what he needs. He needs a family, he needs a past, he needs an answer. Who am I? And well, no one seems more likely to him to have what he needs than Black Doom. So in the end, Shadow follows his orders. He lets Black Doom tell him to gather the Chaos Emeralds for a purpose he's completely in the dark about. From the perspective of the player, Black Doom is clearly a villain. There's simply no hiding that. The game doesn't even try. Even so, Shadow's actions make sense. The player may know more than he does, but they won't know everything and will be curious for the answers Black Doom offers. There's no video game amnesia trope that hits quite like Shadow's. The point is not to create an easy or cheap mystery. Black Doom is mysterious, completely independent of Shadow's memory. The point is to give Shadow another chance to grow, to give him space from his trauma and anger. This space also saves him from Black Doom in a way. He's desperate to reawaken the anger that we saw in Shadow in SA2. His amnesia may be just what was needed to thwart Black Doom's plans in the end. He made a choice at the end of Sonic Adventure 2 to put Maria's wish over revenge. For that choice, he met his doom. Now he has a new doom to face. A doom that will follow him. A doom he must resist.